In this video, I'm going to explain to you about inventory valuation. So all this while, the inventory figure is just given to you. Now, I'm referring to closing or ending inventory here. So all this while, the ending inventory figure was just given to us, and we just had to use it or record it accordingly. But in this chapter, we're going to learn how to calculate the ending inventory. So there are two acceptable methods that we're going to learn here. And the method which I'm going to explain now is FIFO. So there are two methods, the FIFO method. FIFO stands for first in, first out, and the AVCO method. AVCO stands for average cost. So now I'm explaining the FIFO method. And the system used here is the perpetual system. So perpetual system means the inventory balance is recalculated after each transaction. So in real life, inventory is stored in a warehouse, and the storekeeper is in charge of managing or controlling the movement of inventory in and out of the store, the warehouse, the store, sorry. Okay, so the storekeeper needs to know what is the inventory, how much of inventory coming in, and how much of inventory needs to be taken out. Okay, so in the perpetual system, this system maintains a running balance of inventory in hand after each transaction, which means to say, we are going to calculate the inventory balance each time there is a transaction. So transaction could be either inventory coming in or inventory moving out. Okay, so we have two methods, the FIFO method, which stands for first in, first out, and the AVCO method, which stands for average cost, weighted average cost. Okay, in the FIFO method, we assume that inventory is to be used in order of which it is received by the supplier. So this means that when we remove the inventory out from the warehouse, we are going to remove the oldest inventory first. So that's what it means. The inventory which came in first will have to be removed out first. So if you keep doing this, at the end of the day, the balance of inventory in hand would represent the latest inventory purchase. So now I'm going to demonstrate an example with this question here. Okay, so in example, I'm going to use this data. Now this data merely states the date and the details. So the details, as you can see, is either inventory brought down from previous period, and what are all the purchases and all of the sales of the inventory. So when you see purchases, that means inventory is coming into the store. Okay, sales, we are removing the inventory out from the store. So we have date, details, units. So units here represent the physical number, the physical quantity of inventory. And unit cost represents cost per unit of how much we bought the inventory for. Okay, let's get started. Now, our end objective is to calculate the inventory balance in hand. Okay. So I will start off with this, the first line, which reads as balance brought down, 100 units at $8 per unit. So the way I will record this is like this, 100 at $8. Okay. We do not record it straight away as $800. As doing so, we would not be able to capture the units and the price per unit. What I want to maintain all the time is I want to be able to see the units and the cost per unit. So that's why I did not record as 800, but rather as 100 at $8. Okay, so this is the balance of inventory at the start of the period. And then the business purchased additional 400 units at $10 per unit. So we need to record that under the received column, because when you purchase inventory, we are receiving inventory. The inventory goes into the warehouse. So now we have actually 500 units, the $100 units from the past, plus the 400 additional units purchased. So the way we should write it is like this. we should write the 100 at $8 first, because this is the older inventory and this is the newer one. So we would write the inventory brought down, and then we would copy this here. So this is how we represent the 500 units. We see them separately. As long as the cost per unit is a different figure, it's $8 here and $10 for the 400 units, we cannot merge them. We write them separately. Okay, so the next transaction is we need to remove 300 units of inventory away from the stock. So here's where the FIFO method starts. To take out 300 units, because the 100 units was the older one, we need to remove as much as we can. So which means we need to remove all the 100. Take note, we have to write it this way. And another 200 from this 400. So we take out 200. So upon doing this, 100 units at 8 minus 100 units at 8, there will be nothing left behind. So that's why you see a blank space here. Whereas 400 units at 10 minus 200 units at 10. So we still have a balance of 200 units at 10. $10, yes. Okay, then the next transaction is we are purchasing 500 units at $12 per unit. So this adds on to our inventory. So you need not forgetting to bring down this 200 here, record the 500 units received, and copy the 500 units here. So which means we now have 700 units in hand, which we will write them separately like this, 200 and 500, simply because the cost per unit is different figure. Okay, you can only combine them if the cost per unit is the same. Okay, next, we are removing 400 units. So, which means we need to take out 200 units at 10. So there'll be nothing here. And another 200 from this 500. So there it is. So now the balance is 300 units at $12 per unit. Okay. Then we are removing another 100 units. So 300 at 12 minus 100 at 12. So we now have a balance of 200 units at 12. And finally, we purchased an additional 200 units at $13 per unit. So we bring this balance down. We record the purchase and we copy the purchase amount here. So at the end of the day, we now have 400 units, which is seen separately as 200 times 12 and 200 times 13. So now we can multiply and add these two groups to get the final closing inventory figure. So 200 at 12 comes up to $2,400. 200 at 13 is $2,600. So adding these two up, our closing inventory is $5,000. Okay, so now I will demonstrate using the same example, the second method. The second method is called FIFO. FIFO stands for average cost. Okay, I'm using the same data. So we have an opening balance of 100 units at $8 per unit. So we write them like that. And then we purchased additional 400 units at $10 per unit. Now take note that the unit cost is not the same, right? So now under FIFO, how it works is each time we purchase new groups of inventory at a different cost per unit, we need to calculate the average cost per unit. Okay, so the average cost per unit. So to calculate the average cost per unit, we simply multiply and add them. So 100 times 8 is 800. 400 times 10 is 4,000. So adding these, you'll get 800 plus 4,000. So that's 4,800. And you need to divide 4,800 with the number of units, which is 100 plus 4,000. So 4,800 divide 500 will give us $9.60. So now our inventory balance is 500 units at $9.60. Okay, maybe if that was not clear to you, I'll show you in working. So how did I get $9.60 is I need to find the average cost between these two groups. So that's 100 times 8 plus 500, plus 400 times 10 over 100 plus 400. So this is going to give me 800 plus 4,000 over 500. And that's how I got $9.60. Okay. So moving ahead, the next transaction is we need to remove 300 units. So since $9.60 is the latest calculated cost per unit, average cost per unit, I will have to use this latest calculated average cost per unit. So we always use the latest average cost per unit once we have calculated that figure. So removing 300 from this 500, we have a balance of 200 at 960. And take note that unlike the FIFO method, in this method, average cost method, we no longer have to separate the groups of inventory. We can, once you have calculated the average cost per unit, we can combine them as one line. For example, you not have to write the 500 as 100 separately and 400 separately. Okay, then the next transaction is purchasing 500 units at $12 per unit. Okay, so now this is a new purchase and the cost per unit here is different from 960. It's 960 here, it's 12. So I need to recalculate the same way here. So which means 200 times 9.6 plus 500 times 12 over 200 plus 500. So you always divide by the units. Okay, so this will give me $11.31, and that's how I got the cost per unit as $11.31. And as for the units, I just add these two up, 200 plus 500 to give me 700. So the next transaction is I need to remove 100 units. So I'm sorry, I need to remove 400 units. So I remove 400 units using the latest calculated average cost per unit this time, which is $11.31. So now I have a balance of 300 units at $11.31. And then the next transaction, you need to remove 100 units. So using the latest cost per unit. So I now have a balance of 200 units. And finally, the last transaction that I'm purchasing 200 units at $13 per unit. So I need to combine this and calculate the latest average cost per unit. So once again, it's 200 times 11.31 plus 200 times 13 over 200 plus 200. Yeah, 200 plus 200, and that is going to give me $12.16, which is how I got this figure. And as for this one, I just add these two to give me this figure. So finally, at the end of the day, my closing inventory value is 4,863. So obviously, these two methods give me different figures. So in an exam question, you'll be instructed on which method to use. So you should read the exam question carefully and calculate accordingly. Thank you.